Thank you.
Awesome. Anything else, Melissa, or can I go ahead and get started?
You are good to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming to this talk. Super excited to dive into this information. Let me share my screen here. All right. So we're going to talk about startups today. So I'm really curious as we get started here to learn a little bit more about everyone on the call and maybe what your career path has looked like, what you're doing now. Have you ever interacted with a startup before? So some of those key questions. What interested you in this talk is a really big one. I want to make sure that the content that I'm sharing is useful and applicable if you came here to learn the answers to some specific questions. And then what is your current role or discipline? So are you a data person? Are you a front-end developer? So I would open it up to you guys. Feel free to unmute or type in the chat. I would love to know what your backgrounds are.
I can start. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So my background is actually interior design, and then I did a boot camp and am now working as a front-end developer for a company that works with startups. So this is, and I just finished my first week. So this is very apropos. And so I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome.
I've never worked with startups before, but it is very different timing wise, like project management wise, than anything I've done before. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Johanna, thank you. So you hear me talk, but no, appreciate that. Anybody else?
Yeah, so basically what interests me in this topic is that I've worked with a big enterprise, I want to say multinational enterprise company for many years. And I've been interviewing for like a community manager position for a startup company. And that's the big reason why this topic kind of interests me, to learn like how could I say, the small nuances or the small details of working with startups.
For sure. Awesome. So with this, I want to make sure it's more of a dialogue than anything else. So as I'm going through slides, if you have any questions, feel free to speak up or type in the chat. I know Emily and Melissa will be watching the chat in case anything comes through, and they will stop me. So definitely want to make sure if there are any pieces that really stand out to anybody, we can stop and have that conversation. Athena, I work at a data analytics company. Awesome. So yeah, we'll get into all of these different pieces, and looking forward to your questions. So I'll start off with a little bit about myself. Everybody can see the slides, right? Good. Okay. Awesome. So about me, I'll do this very briefly, but I graduated from Baylor with a degree in management information systems. So knew that I wanted to go the tech route pretty early. So MIS is kind of a hybrid between, think about it, if the business school and computer science kind of mesh together. That's what that degree is. While I was at Baylor, I did a couple internships with ConocoPhillips. So I was working there as a business analyst, and then I did another internship as more of a software developer. So kind of trying to see what the different pieces of tech look like in larger organizations. After I graduated, I ended up in a Java development position at USAA. Quickly moved into more of the data space. It just happened to fall that way. And I've been working in data ever since. So, not to belabor too much of the about me, but one of my last roles in a larger business intelligence data organization was at Activision Blizzard. I'm a really big gamer, lots of World of Warcraft. So it was really my dream job at Blizzard, getting to work on a game that I really loved, and has definitely colored the way that I ended up in the startup environment, because I was really in basically my dream job, and I decided to drop that and come to a financial services startup where we deal with accounting data. So it sounds like a lot of fun, right? So we'll get into that a little bit more, but I'm going to start with the basics here. What is a startup? So Mike.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
You said you were working in the gaming industry and went into financials. Would you ever go back to gaming industry?
Oh, it'd be tough. I think it's as a gamer, it's difficult once you get onto. So I got to work on the game design, but also financial data side at Blizzard, and it was pretty tough working on the financial side, because you start to see, oh, how can we make more money off of the players here, and how can we, microtransactions, things like that. And it's kind of a once you see how the sausage is made scenario, that kind of disillusions it a bit. So I don't know if I have it in me to go back to that, but it would all depend on the opportunity. So.
And sorry, one more question on that. But do you still play after seeing how the sausage is made? Do you still play?
Yeah, it's definitely limited now. And we'll get into a little bit of that work-life balance. But it's still play. You can't take it completely away. So gotta have the video games.
Thanks for the transparency and candor.
Of course. All right, so what is a startup? What does this even look like? And I wanted to cover this piece because when I came into Overlay and I was even considering whether or not I wanted to go work for a startup, I had no idea how any of this worked. And I don't know if everybody on the call has seen Silicon Valley, but that was basically what my background was on, hearing about startups. And it's like, oh, if you were in early to, the Facebooks or the Twitters, et cetera, and you hear some of those stories, but you don't really get the full picture of, how do they make money? What does funding look like? How are they valued? Things like that. So we'll start with my chart over here. I apologize, guys. But when we're thinking about what it's like to work at a startup, and you've probably heard a lot of stories, probably some negative things, maybe about startups being a little cutthroat or having to work around the clock. And I think some of that can be contextualized around how these businesses operate and kind of what they're up against to be successful. So with that, let's look at our investing landscape. So where does the money come from? You have a couple different places that these larger funds might come from to invest in certain companies. So things like university endowments, you may have heard the Yale Endowment Fund talked about a lot. One of the more popular ones, maybe it's family offices, maybe they're institution-based, or even, very wealthy individuals that are contributing to these startups. So you have all these investments, and I think one of the most important things that investors are going to look at is they want to make sure that they're diversifying across their asset classes. So you want a good mixture between your returns and the liquidity of your money. So we'll start in the bottom right corner. You've got your cash. That's going to be your most liquid. There's not a lot of time that you have to wait before you can take your money out, essentially. And so that's where we'll move in. How available is your money to you? How long do you have to wait to make more money off of this investment? So next to that is your equity and fixed income. So an example of equity like this would be buying a share of Apple or buying a share of Facebook. So you could buy that and buy that on Robinhood or something like that, and then you could turn around a couple days later and sell that stock. So not a lot of time investment, but also maybe not as large of a reward. So we're moving up the reward ladder here. So we get to private equity. And private equity, you're going to have usually, I would say, 5 to 10 years of your money being tied up in private equity. You're hoping to get a certain return. Hopefully that return is larger than what you would get off of, buying out of the stock market, but it's not going to be as high as venture capital. So venture capital, so this is the really shiny form of investments. This is, if you've watched any shows about startups like Silicon Valley, everybody's chasing after the VC investors. And so with VC investments, they might look at something like, okay, I'm going to go invest in 10 different companies. And out of those 10 different companies, 5 of them might fail completely. I won't get any return out of them. And then, 4 of them may do okay. Maybe I get a 100% return. That sounds great. But really what they're betting on is that there's going to be this one unicorn, this, one company that does so well. You've got those billion-dollar valuations, you're making 1,200 or 2,000% return. So that's the venture capital game. And you might have heard the term dry powder thrown out a lot. So it's the idea that there's all this money, all this cash and liquidity out there ready to be injected into these different companies. So with that, and again, feel free to, if there are any questions, I know I might miss a part in here, but what makes a startup attractive to these VC firms? So we're talking about finding these unicorn companies. If you're a startup, how do you attract these people? And really what it comes down to for the first part and getting that initial round of investment is, one, are there the right people behind the startup? So do they have the vision? Do they have kind of do they have the background that they could be successful in this? And then what does their leadership look like? Do they have a good track record? And the other side of that is something called the total addressable market, or TAM. And it's basically, what is the total revenue opportunity of this idea? You don't want to think small. You want to think, what is the largest market that we can capture? So those are really the two things that, getting that initial investment, that's what you're going to be focusing on. Do I have this big market to go after? And do I have the right people running this business? So from there, we go into our funding rounds. I think this was one of the things that was most interesting / something I didn't really know a lot about before I got into a startup. And so, maybe you've gotten in, you have a good total addressable market, and then you have good people behind your idea. And with this first round of funding, it's usually friends, family, a close circle. They're going to be funding, those initial employees just to get you off the ground. So not a lot of money coming in. And this is usually what's called your angel investor or your pre-seed. So you're really in the stage of proving that you can do something and just kind of trying to get it off the ground. So while you're in that pre-seed, you're building your product there, but you have to start thinking about that next stage of funding. What does it look like? How am I going to start attracting these larger investors? And that's really where you move into the VC area. So you see on this chart here, we have this area here, it's seed capital, and then angel investors, and then you're moving into early stages. And so this first, second, and third, you've probably heard things like Series A, Series B. That's going to be the first round Series A, second round Series B. So those are your very early stages. And with each of these series rounds of funding, your company is going to become a little more institutionalized, a little more structured. But with that, moving out of the pre-seed range and into kind of like the real game with the VCs, and now they're hunting for these really great ideas. You have to start addressing not only can we do something, but do people want to buy it? And maybe we have this really big market, but are people actually going to buy this thing that we're building? And you have to sell them on that so much that they want to fund the whole team versus those 2 or 3 salaries that you're funding with your angel investments. So it's a really interesting thing, the true like dichotomy of power and the shift that you start to see with, you know, early stage, you're pretty much looking for anybody that'll fund your project. And then, you know, you start to see that flip and everybody wants to be involved if you're successful. So just moving along this line here. So the biggest thing, and we'll get into valuation next. Yeah, Mike, I can definitely share out some of this. But some of the next pieces here, and you know, you've raised these funds, you need more money at some point to keep growing. And how do you measure the valuation around that? And you know, who's going to be interested in pouring more money into your company? And so this is where you get into a lot of those valuation numbers. And with this, you've probably heard, especially recently, all these crazy valuations for startups, and oh, the market's just going wild. And really what this is coming from is this multiple over here gets changed depending on growth. So, you know, you want to look at your total value, but for SaaS, it's a little bit different. So SaaS being software as a service. So you can think your Salesforce and your big tech companies. And when we talk about value, it's very different from, you know, your typical brick and mortar, or, you know, maybe manufacturing companies, things like that. When we're talking about valuation of manufacturing companies and very typical companies in that sense, they usually use something called EBITDA. So that's your earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. And I know we're all accountants in the room, and that totally made sense. So what you can really think of it as in simpler terms is your annual net profit. So all of your money after costs, which makes a little bit more sense for valuing a company. You want to know how much they're making after they paid for all their cost of goods and their services, things like that. But completely different world for startups. So what you're concerned with for your startups is your annual recurring revenue. So how much money are you bringing in over the year? And then you're multiplying it by this multiple, which is based on growth. So how fast are you growing? How quickly are you accruing that additional ARR? And it seems a little crazy to do it that way, but the reason they do it based on revenue instead and don't take in that EBITDA or that net profit number is usually with a startup, you're trying to grow so quickly that any cash or revenue that you're making, you're pouring right back into the company because you want it to grow quickly. You know, you're building up the team, you're, you know, finding more office space, things like that. So very different, just, and I call these things out just because it's a different way of looking at things and something that I definitely didn't know before I joined. So I'll pause there for a second for any questions before we get into the why would you want to join a startup with all of these super fun funding pieces. I also love Shark Tank, Mike. So why would you want to join a startup? And I think one of the most important things for me was really controlling your own path. When I was, you know, working at USA or working at Activision, you know, I came in as I was an analyst, and I had a very specific set of tasks that I was doing. Couldn't really go outside of that. And then you also have pretty strict promotion cycles in a lot of places. So I know a lot of companies that I've seen or, you know, heard from friends, it's, you know, you're going to have to wait at least a year and a half to get promoted, or it's going to be 2 years, or, you know, there are a couple people in front of you that have to go through the promotion cycle first. And, you know, if you're coming out, maybe you really like to work, or, you know, you really want to move quickly through something and progress, it's a little, you know, it's a little disheartening to have that, you know, feeling like you can't move forward until other people do, or you have to wait a certain amount of time. So the startup, I won't say that it's, you know, night and day, but really depending on when you join the startup, you know, you are in control of your own destiny depending on the output, really. And then same kind of thought here with the meaningful work. I come from a data background, so I don't know if this example will necessarily resonate with everybody, but I think, and it's kind of a meme of sorts too, I've definitely seen it on LinkedIn, but you spend a lot of time building out a dashboard, and you're ready to show this dashboard to your stakeholders, and you think you found some really great insights. You spent so much time formatting it, and maybe you publish it out to the Tableau server. You present it to your stakeholders, and then you go to visit it in a couple weeks, and it's got 5 views, and 4 of them were you checking the data, and 1 was the day that you actually presented it. It's like, oh man, why did I pour weeks of work into this specific piece, all for it to not really mean anything? And so I think that's startup specifically, because you're dealing with those funding structures, and because you have to be really cognizant of that cash flow and making sure that you're making the right decisions with that money. Every task has to be intentional. So busy work's not a thing. If you've ever watched the clock before while you're at work, that's not really a thing either, because the work's still going to be there at the end of the day, no matter if you're at your desk or at home. So it's and it really depends on what you want. If that's something that resonates with you, then startup might be for you. Katie, sorry, I saw your, is it okay? I see your question now. Dashboard. So basically for that, in the data space, it's a tool for showing, it might be charts or graphs or specific numbers back to executives, or even business managers. A good example of this, yes, Athena, exactly. Company performance metrics. So maybe I'm the CFO and I'm really interested in what my revenue was the day before. So what a data team would typically do is they'd create a dashboard at a specific link, so that CFO could go in every morning and say, oh, okay, here's my revenue from the day before. The data is hooked up on a live feed, so I can always check on the performance of my company.
Before you move further, I have a question about the evaluation that you were talking. And the question is, at what point do venture capitalists fall off the, I want to say, the chart of a startup? Is it when it goes into IPO, or when do the venture capitalists just quit caring?
So it depends. And I thought I had maybe I took that. But one of the pieces, it's essentially a liquidity event. And so a liquidity event could be an IPO. It could be a total sale of the company. So in that case, say that we were acquired by a different company. At that point, people would be paid out of their shares, or they'd have the option to purchase the shares that they were given, and it would be transferred, and you wouldn't necessarily need those additional injections of funding since it had been purchased by a larger company.
So would it be, I guess, at what point then would it be best to join a startup? Is it before something goes IPO and they get acquired, or?
We'll get into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're stealing my thunder, Mike. And then the last piece on the why is really the opportunity. And this will go into the timing a little bit, but opportunity and the controlling your path pieces are definitely dependent on when you join the startup. For me, I was the 3rd hire and the first engineering hire outside of the CTO. So I have a little bit of a skewed vision on how early you should come into a startup. But with that, and being that early, and I don't think you have to be the 3rd person. I think it's still true at the 10th or the 15th, that you're always going to be wearing a lot of hats when you're in a company that small, which leads to a lot of opportunities. So it's kind of it's a double-edged sword. Of course, you have a lot of responsibility. You're going to be doing a lot of different things, a lot of time, but you're also going to be exposed to a lot of different technologies if you're on the tech side, and also leadership. So I think that's been a big thing for me here specifically is, I came in as an IC, or an individual contributor. I was hired on as a senior data engineer, And then, 6 months in, I guess the CTO, my manager at the time, was like, "How do you feel about managing?" It's like, "That sounds awful." And he's like, "Great, that's why I think you should do it." Okay. It turned out to be a good thing. So a lot of opportunity. The picture I have up here, and I won't spend too much time on this because I know it's moving quickly here, but it was the Snowflake Startup Challenge. For those of you on the data side, Snowflake is a data warehousing company, and in 2021, they hosted the first inaugural Snowflake Startup Challenge. And it was, if you win, we will invest $250,000 in your startup. And I remember the day we were passing the link around in Slack, and it's like, we have to make a video. They were like 5-minute video pitch. I'm like, this, we don't have time for this, guys. And we ended up doing it. And we got the notice that we were, top 10 semifinalists. Like, there's no way. So we went through this whole thing. It was basically Shark Tank style, Mike. We pitched to the judges. So it was a live pitch over Zoom, but live pitch. And, it was true Shark Tank asking questions. And it was one of those moments like, okay, if I had stayed in my, relatively safe, industry job, I wouldn't have ended up here. And so, and specifically at Overlay, my bosses and, our CEO, our COO have been, they've always involved me in a lot of different things, like even pitching for our funding rounds. So going back to, we've got to get our seed investments, we've got to get on the phone with all these VCs. I got to go with them, and it's absolutely nerve-wracking, but one of the best experiences. I'm an engineer and usually get left in the basement to do all the coding, but with a startup, you get a lot of these opportunities, and they're all around because you're a really small group and you've got to get it done. Yeah.
Hallie, I had a question.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this talk, and I really appreciated your insight into kind of mapping out the whole life cycle of a startup. I know that you joined super early as one of the first engineering hires, as you mentioned. How did you deal with wearing multiple hats and finding some peace in the pressure cooker that some early startups can be? Because you need to do so much and there's only so few of you.
Yep, that's I'll get into that a little bit with this early days section, but it's a completely different environment. I remember when I first interviewed, I've been working a lot of hours at Blizzard, probably unnecessarily. And so, I didn't fully grasp that I was going to a startup. And I remember interviewing with the CTO, and I was like, I really don't want to be working more than 40 hours a week. And he was like, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's going to be great. I work a lot more than 40 hours, especially in the beginning. And, I'll caveat that with, it's very different depending on when you join. And we'll talk about like the specific timing of those pieces. But yeah, there's a lot of pressure, especially early on, and especially if you're really bought into the vision. So, you really want this thing to succeed. You're going to do everything in your power to move it forward. And what's really cool about it, and I don't think it's talked about enough, is, yes, there's a lot of pressure. It can be a pretty cutthroat environment externally, but if you have the right people around you and you have the right team that supports you, and you feel more energized after working with them, it's an awesome environment to be in. There are going to be some lows, there are going to be some really tough days, but those high days are so much better, especially having like just great people around you.
They say if you're having fun at what you do, then it doesn't, the hours, it's like goes away.
Yep. Yeah, and that's exactly it. And the thing for me was coming from gaming, working on my favorite video game of all time, and in my dream job I was sitting next to the dev team, and still doing data, but I never thought I would come back and say, and I'm hopping ahead here, but never thought I'd come back and say, I'm having way more fun working with accounting data and building out financial services tools. So yeah, so the experience here, and I'll try to hop through these a little quicker, but when I started, well, when I found Overlay, I found them on LinkedIn. And for some transparency there, Blizzard had gone through a large number of layoffs in early 2019. And I was very lucky to make it through the layoffs, but it definitely changed the culture. Everybody was afraid. There were rumors of second rounds. It was really different. I was out in California. My boyfriend and I had moved out there, and we were already wanting to move back to Texas, and it was just really unsettling that you'd just seen your coworkers come in and lose their job in one day, not even be able to grab their belongings before they were walked out by security, and maybe it's time to find something else. So I admittedly spam applied everywhere on LinkedIn, and didn't even really remember applying for Overlay, but got the call back. And this is a little bit on the timing of things, but when I initially interviewed with them, we went through a couple rounds, and I decided not to join. I would have been the first technical hire, and I just didn't feel like I was at a place where I could be successful with that. And definitely was a little nervous joining a startup at that point. So it wasn't until 6 months after that they reapproached, and it's like, okay, you've hired a CTO now, we'll reevaluate here. And so got the offer, and it's like, okay, do I want to leave Blizzard now? What was it going to be like? And so of course then ensued the Reddit threads, Medium articles. What is it like working for a startup? Reading all of these absolute horror stories, and it's pretty scary. So I had people telling me too, after I decided to take the job, coworkers telling me that I was making a terrible decision. So that was a lot of fun. Loved that. On top of the fear of coming to a no-name startup. So, and then early days here. So, and this is an actual picture. They actually left me a note next to my desk. When we first started out, we were in an absolutely tiny office that we somehow fit 5 desks into, like IKEA, sit stand desks. We're all sitting next to each other. It was a lot of fun in retrospect, but absolutely the Wild West. So for my engineers in the room, we had no Git repository, no task management, nothing, no Slack. We were on a tool called Basecamp, but we mostly just emailed around. Yes, Katie, it was wild. And we were basically just in the business of getting client work done. So I was like, all right, we're gonna sell some things. We just gotta get going.
But if you were sitting next to each other, why'd you need anything, email or anything like
that?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Documentation.
Oh, no.
Tracking things.
Yeah, that takes all the fun out of it. It's all a guessing game. So, but yeah, like I said, I started as an IC. I was a data engineer, but did pretty much everything from, I remember being asked to update the website for the first time. It's like, oh, okay. It's like, sure, I guess I wrote some HTML like 10 years ago. This will be fine. So it's just kind of a wild ride of, you have so much responsibility because, you're trying to make this thing happen, but there's also so much freedom with it. We would like, oh yeah, I'm gonna cut out early because I'm gonna work later tonight. So it was just a completely different environment. But I think the thing that was really defining for it, especially in those early stages, is we got to create the full culture around this company. And it was little things too, like, and you wouldn't normally think of things like, okay, how are we going to celebrate work anniversaries? Or how are we going to celebrate birthdays? How will we do team building? Those are things that were always taken care of by somebody putting something together. And now, needed to make sure that everybody got their favorite gift card on their birthday. And then with that too, it's, you do eventually have to hire people. I remember when we were making, I was asked to make the first hire for my team. Absolutely terrified. We were, trying to find people, and selling people to come work for a startup is so difficult. Like, guys, I promise this is great. It's awesome. We're doing really cool stuff. And you're hyping it up and you just feel like, some crazy salesperson. But we found our, second technical hire on Reddit. So it was absolutely a last ditch effort. We were trying to find a data engineer. So we're on the SQL subreddit, just like posting, and, people will rip you apart on there when you're trying to hire people. And, I remember thinking, I'm responsible for this person now. We have to make sure that we have the cash flows, make sure that, he has a job. You're taking on that responsibility as well. But it was so much fun. Looking back, there were definitely some very, very difficult times. I have my significant other on this call. I'm sure he's sitting here thinking back to a lot of tears, a lot of very difficult pieces through this, and just trying to navigate everything, and all very new things that I hadn't really encountered before, especially from a leadership position. And then current stage. So, and we did a nice little office photo shoot a couple months ago. So that's where all these pictures are from. But things happen pretty quickly. So those early days that I talked about, that was that pre-seed round. So, it's kind of the friends and family type thing, not our real funding. But then, current stage, we're currently in our seed round. We went through the venture capital funding. We did so many pitches. You get told no so many times, and then you find the investor that understands what you're doing, is excited, gets the vision behind it, and really how it's going to be a great product. So things really happen quickly. We won the Snowflake Startup Challenge. We got our seed round fully funded, and then it's time to hire. And I'm a terrible recruiter. So the idea that we needed to build out a full engineering team was absolutely horrifying. But this January, we doubled our engineering team. So 1 month we had people starting every Monday in January. So we would kick off these like welcome to Overlay boot camps, where we take everybody through everything. And it's a really interesting and kind of scary thing, especially being early on, is, like I said, we didn't even have a Git repository. And, looking back, it's like, I stood a lot of those things up. They're, these projects were mine. I had a lot of ownership over them. And now we're hiring all these people. We have a full department. And there's this element of like, oh, I have to give my Legos away to people, and they're going to go take them and turn them into their own products. And, they're going to have ownership over them. And it's just a pretty wild thing to see. And, you look back to, 2 years ago, this was very different. We were in a shoebox. But it's really cool to, move out of the day-to-day stuff and be more focused on the product. And, we can do really cool things like, recruit from colleges, and we can bring on college hires now because we do have that stability. And so back to that opportunity piece, lots of opportunities around there. Yes, Athena, that is the exact article that I stole that from. It's a great article.
Yeah, it's so helpful, especially to like frame a mindset around something that's so high growth. It's like actually being so close to the action in the beginning, and feeling that ownership. It's kind of hard to see the company take off, right? And then you get more specialized in your roles. So I definitely hear you.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. And I mean, and it kind of sneaks up on you too, because like, okay, well, I was the one that was staying up late taking care of that. Now they're doing it. What do you guys need me for? And so it's a cool thing, and kind of moving into more of a, right now I lead our engineering department, and it's a very different skill set for that. But the people that are doing the things that I used to do are just absolutely killing it. They're doing an amazing job, so much better than I was doing. So it's really cool to see everybody grow and in that respect.
How hard was
So
it? How hard was it for you to some of those projects that you were handling to give them up and trust in somebody that's going to continue doing those projects?
Very tough, very tough. And there are some initiatives that when we were working, yeah, exactly, Katie, and not micromanage. I think that's the hardest part. There were some initiatives too that when we were working through client deliverables and really, we just got to get this done and then we can go work on product stuff. And I would think, okay, if I just get all these pieces done, I can go work on that really cool initiative that I want to work on so bad. I apologize, guys. My boss's computer's ringing. But so you really want to go work on those things. I remember, specific project. I was like, okay, once we hire a team, I'll get to go work on that. And guess what? We ended up hiring somebody to work on that piece. And so it really is, you got to give it away. And, we're able to, now that we've really proven ourselves, we have that external validation from our investors, more developers are interested in joining, and they're much more specialized. They're going to do these projects, much more justice than I would, but it's so difficult to give those pieces away. But I think you guys already know the answer to would I do it again, of course. It's been absolutely exhausting, but absolutely.
Hallie, sorry, one more question. Yep. So you mentioned looking to deliver, or sorry, working on client deliverables. I feel like on the engineering side, it can get kind of contentious, right? Because you get, especially without a product direction and a roadmap in the early stage of startup, it's like, do you sacrifice your direction for the product to satisfy this one big customer that you might land? How did you guys balance that with the sales team? I feel like that can be kind of difficult.
Yeah. No, that's been something that I would say that's been kind of a theme of this year. And because you look at some very big fish that you could land if it's like, oh, we were totally going to build in those features, and then it's a total pivot. But I think I will say our CEO and COO have a really clear direction around, okay, these are the amounts that we're willing to bend on those pieces, and maybe we'll rearrange the roadmap, but we're not going to completely pivot just to go do something that's not our end goal, not our market. So we've been really fortunate there, in that we're not going off and chasing things like that. But yeah, it's really difficult too. And kind of going back to that valuation piece is, okay, well, this could be a lot of annual recurring revenue. That would really drive the valuation up. How do you say no to that in favor of continuing on with the product that you've roadmapped out, the product that you're pushing towards, and your investors are excited about? It's definitely, I think that's one of the most difficult things.
Thank you for the insight.
Who will succeed at a startup? I think this one's a little bit tough, and it's also dependent on the timing. I know I made a couple of jokes about working a lot of hours, but to be completely honest, it's not a 9 to 5, and I think it's important to call that out. It might not be for everyone. I think it's important to if you're looking for a startup, finding one that aligns with your values on that side. I think there's a good middle ground there that can be found. But I think it's really important to be honest with yourself about, your time and emotional commitment that you want to have to your job. Because, especially being early on, it's hard to keep yourself from being, letting it overtake your life. I think it's a little bit of a different story down the road. I know, with with my engineers specifically, you know, I don't want them working nights. I don't want them working weekends. There's no reason that we can't, you know, at the stage that we're at now, there's no reason that we can't get the work done during the day. There will still be times where, you know, we are a startup, you know, you might have to log in later, but we keep those very few and far between. And we're not, I mean, we're still in a seed stage. So it's not to say that it's really the difference between, you know, being one of the first few employees and, you know, waiting out and being like the 8th or 9th engineer. So I don't think it has to be a deal breaker on the 9 to 5 piece. And then when's the right time to go to a startup? So right time in the sense of how old the startup is, and then right time for you in your career. I think, you know, the years that I spent at USAA and Blizzard, I had some really great technical mentors. And they really, you know, between best practices and, you know, just having that support, hearing from their knowledge was so important for getting me ready for this work. And I think the thing to note is you may not have that kind of support in startups. I know that as we've been trying to build out our engineering team, we've made sure that there is that mentorship level. So, you know, for any engineers coming in, they do have that, you know, how important it is. But, you know, some startups may not have that luxury to have the mentorship. So, you know, making sure that you're ready before you make the jump. When I look back at where I was before I came to Overlay, there were kind of some signs that I think lend well to this. And, you know, I was always wanting to wear a lot of hats and do other disciplines roles. I was always trying to do data engineering stuff because I wanted to take my projects from essentially cradle to grave. Like, okay, I want to go pull my own data and I'm also going to do my transformations, but I want to be the one that presents it. And I think if you're having those feelings, then, you know, startup might be a good place for you. And then 2 is if you're feeling a little stifled by the technology stack. That's something that's been really cool here is, you know, you find something cool. It's a matter of like, hey, can I get the credit card? We're getting this new tool. And that's how, you know, a lot of stuff has come about for us. You know, we use GitLab. It was a matter of, hey, we need a Git repository. We're gonna choose one. And then, you know, tools like DBT, for instance, for the data folks in the room. You know, it might be a hard sell at some larger companies, but you know, you can move pretty quickly in a startup and there isn't as much red tape. So how do you find a startup that's right for you? So built-in is it's a website, but it's really a community of startups. When a startup joins, they have to pay to be on the website, but they take you through all of these different questionnaires and they're super in-depth. So this is just a quick screenshot from our site on built-in. So we have, you know, Q&A with some of the people that we work with, and then, you know, perks and benefits. And so it gives you a really good idea of, you know, what the culture is like, what the values are, just by looking at these different pieces. So it definitely encourage that. LinkedIn as well, I call that out because, I mean, I found Overlay on LinkedIn by chance, but there are a lot of different groups out there for finding startups. And then last but certainly not least, Women Who Code. We have, for those of you that are in the Slack, we have a job postings area, and, you know, too, there are a lot of people in the Slack that either work for startups or have worked for startups that are always happy to either chat about them or get you connected with their groups. So with that, really appreciate you guys sticking with me through that. But any other questions that I can answer? Good call out, Mike. I haven't been on there, but yeah, I think there was I forget the name of the other one, but there are some good startup sites out there.
Crunchbase is a good one.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So you mentioned where to find startup jobs. Do you have any tips on how to pitch yourself as like a founding engineer at a startup? And I think you mentioned a couple of things earlier, like the willingness to wear a bunch of different hats and jump into things that you've never done before. I think there's a lot of confidence that is required for that, because like right now I'm like, I know I'm going to do things I haven't done before, but how can I prove to someone that I'm capable of learning?
Yeah, I think it's so. I had a little bit of a different experience because our founder is not technical. So when I remember the first time I was on the phone with him, he was talking me through some of the problems they were trying to solve. And he was like, have you pulled data before from a SQL server? I was like, yes, I have. He's like, have you used SQL before? Yes. And, for a data background, they were very, very basic things. And I remember we were about to get off the call and he was like, all right, we're going out to celebrate because we've just learned how to do SQL joins. And I was like, oh, okay, you guys are really early on. And so I didn't have to do a ton of selling on that side because relatively, coming from a very technical background, whereas, they were coming out of more consulting side. But what I'd say with that is, from other founders that we've talked to who are just getting started, they really want people that are bought into solving problems and not necessarily there are so many things that we've done at Overlay that we're learning on the fly. And you just kind of continue to do that. I think it's really showing that willingness to, hey, whatever comes up, we'll figure it out. And that's the attitude that I found is most successful. The people that essentially are willing to, you're willing to take out the trash. You're not really above anything, and you're happy to move outside of your role if the company requires it.
I want to add on to something that Emily asked is how to sell yourself. And the way I've seen something very successful in selling yourself is look at the job description, and then based on the job description, try to create a single slide of 30, 60, 90-day plan, and then, but be very authentic and transparent about that plan and how you're going to accomplish those goals. And that's something that, hiring managers would like to see.
That's a great idea, Mike. Thank you for sharing. Pivoting from that a little bit, what if you're talking to some startups and they don't know what they don't know yet? Like if there is a job description, you're like, I think maybe you like hired a consultant to write that to try to find an engineer and you're not totally sure yet.
So it's funny because that's exactly what I applied for. I applied to be their lead Tableau developer. And then we got on the phone. It's like, why do you need this? You're like, I don't know. Someone told us we needed it. Like, okay, cool. And I think it's being honest and transparent. And if you're, depending on your background, if you can share, hey, well, in X company, this is how we handled this, and I'd love to see how that's applicable to what you're doing. They're going to be so grateful to have technical people helping out on that side, and I think it's really the transparency at the end of the day.
Hallie, I have a question about the early stages and compensation. Do you think it's, or I guess I'm asking how when things are going well, and you mentioned that it goes back into the company, but the workers, are they like, okay, so I was approached for a startup, but then they're like, oh, we don't really have the funds because it goes back into the company, so you'd be paid with experience. So I don't know, like it just sounded really bad.
Yeah. No, I think something that we prioritize, and I obviously can't speak for all startups or anything like that. This is just my singular experience here, and I should probably caveat everything I've said, but this is, I've got singular startup experience, but your talent is, that's what's going to get you off the ground. your people, especially early on, are the ones that are, they're building everything, and they have a lot of power over what happens to your company. And I think if a startup isn't willing to invest in that, because I think the biggest thing, and I'm sure he would be happy with me sharing this, but my CEO always says, I never want people spending time worrying about their pay. Like, I don't need them spending that additional, emotional energy or anything like that. Like, we have a job to get done, let's make sure everybody's paid really well and, happy. So yeah, I think that's an interesting take on things. So no, I think if they haven't learned yet, it's a quick lesson to learn when nobody wants to work for them.
I think also an untouched portion when talking about startup compensation is about equity. Can you share a little bit more insight as to like the high risk, high reward nature of a startup and how that equity can actually be really life changing, especially when you join early?
Yeah, I think what's with that, you can't put a ton of, and I don't say don't put a ton of stock as in like don't factor it in, but it is really a lottery ticket. We go back to that first example of, maybe the venture capital fund is investing in 10 companies. They're really hoping that one company is the unicorn. And you're kind of doing the same thing by joining a startup. They're going to be just as invested in finding that unicorn, and they're still going to have, 9 flops. And so, you hope that you have the same level of judgment. But I think the way that, I have approached it and would approach it, going forward is, it's a great nice to have. I think there are usually trade-offs between salary and equity. And I think it depends on, your lifestyle and what trade-offs you're willing to make for the potential of being able to one day scratch that lottery ticket. But yeah, I think it's very much an individual decision there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think as long as you're transparent with the hiring manager and the hiring manager is transparent with you, there's always room for negotiation. I mean, this recent company that is a startup that I've applied for, he told me like way up front, he said, I may not have the budget to hire you. I said, well, let's talk about it. Let's have a dialogue and talk about it. And once you start talking and having that dialogue, there's always room for negotiation, I think, in anything.
That's a really great call out, Mike, and being willing to make those trade-offs of like, maybe it comes in the form of, okay, well, you can't meet my base comp. Well, can we add a little more to the stock option pool? And that could pay off really well in the end.
Question, Hallie. What do you think the biggest challenge has been for you, non-professionally, by going to a startup?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think it goes back to time, really. I would not have called, this is the longest I've ever been at one company. And I would not have called that making the choice to come to Overlay was going to turn into this. I mean, I was coming into a senior data engineer role. I figured I would go be a data engineer for a while, maybe one promotion and then move on. But Overlay is pretty much a lot of my life revolves around Overlay, and it's become a pretty big thing for that, and everyone that I'm around. So I think it's challenge in that you never really know what you're getting into, and that's why it's so important when you are looking at if you do want to go to a startup, make sure that you really like the people, and you're really bought into the vision.
Were you able to meet on that? Were you able to meet any of the other people that would be a part of your team before saying, yeah, I'd love to work for you? Or was it kind of just you met the one person you interviewed with?
Yeah, so it wasn't really a team when I started. So it was and right before he walked out the door to go home for the day, I asked for permission to tell the story. But I was supposed to meet the CEO for lunch. He was out in California for a conference. And he's like, come on, like, we'll talk more about it. I was like, okay, because I didn't know if these people were even real. To your point, had not met them in person. It sounded a little crazy. It's like, okay, sure. And it was something that John was actually, he had to go to a conference up in Santa Monica. It was going to be about an hour drive. And I was like, oh, well, I don't really want to go to lunch. The lunch was also in Santa Monica. And I was like, I'm just not going to go. I'll like tell them beforehand. I'll just go to the conference with you. Like I'm definitely not going to join the startup. And then I felt really bad and I was not going to just ghost somebody. So I ended up going to lunch, and I remember called John on my way in, and I was like, all right, this shouldn't take long. Like, I'm just going to go listen to the pitch, and then, I'll meet up with you at the conference afterwards. And then an hour and a half later, I called him back and was like, I have to do this. I have to go be part of this. So it's scary too, because at that point, I was third employee and there weren't a lot of people to get different perspectives from. It was really, okay, well, here are the two people that you're going to be stuck in a room with. Hopefully we can make this work, and we're not uprooting our lives for something that's not real. So it's definitely a risk, but that's something that what we've learned a little bit is, we do a lot of team interviews, and they're not grilling panel interviews or anything like that. It's like, do you like these people? Because you're going to spend a lot of time with these people. So it's really important.
Is it something that you can ask for if it's not offered? Is it something that if you were to get an interview and, they were to be rather small, could you say, I would love to, meet more members of the team if at all possible? Is that okay to ask?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah,
I've done it before, and if they have nothing to hide, they're very transparent. They'll say yes, they'll set it up and it gets done.
Yeah, and I would almost say if they don't, it's kind of a red flag. So, you want to get different perspectives and different team perspectives even.
The other thing, there's a lot of tools out there like Glassdoor, and where people are posting, things, anonymously and sincerely, so there's a lot of tools out there too. But it's hard when, like Hallie said, when it's a team of 3 that's just starting off. It's kind of hard because there's nothing you can really find out there.
I was actually just curious about that, just because I'm so used to interjecting, and I'm sure Mike is as well. I feel like it's very common, especially in like boys clubs, to continuously, not necessarily be aware of your surroundings. This is Women Who Code, and I'm genuinely curious, what do you feel like your experience has been being, pretty much the sole woman working in a boys club and in tech? Has it impaired you? Do you feel like it's been a unique experience, better, worse than industry? What do you think?
It's a really nice segue, and I would almost call that a plant of sorts. But yeah, it's been kind of a wild experience. I don't know what everybody else, what your team makeups look like. I know that for at least a couple on the leadership side of Women Who Code, you have female dominated teams, which is so wild to me because there were no women in like my coding classes in college or anything like that. But yeah, I'm the sole engineer at Overlay, or sole female engineer at Overlay. And up until a couple months ago, was the only woman at Overlay. And it is kind of it's a wild experience, even if you've been on male dominated teams, just having no other women. Remember when we made our first female hire and we were just on the phone, and it was like, okay, I realized like it's just been a minute since I worked with another woman. This is wild. Hi, friend. But no, I think the group that I work with they're very, very aware of that. So that's, nice, and they're very supportive as well. They want to become members of Women Who Code. So they'll, they want to be very involved. So that's been good. But the segue piece here is, we want to figure out when I guess I'll back up. When you're recruiting in early stages of startups, it's a lot of, you can go out on LinkedIn, you can buy all the paid posts, but you're a no-name startup. The way that you usually recruit is by word of mouth, and it's going back to your coworkers. And when when everybody's male, they usually have male friends. And so the cycle kind of continues of bringing in more men. And trying to figure out how to combat that. And so, I was also going to post in job postings, but, if anybody is interested in, startup opportunities, we are definitely looking in the Women Who Code network, and not just women, but, making sure that, we're reaching out and have a very fair recruitment process.
One thing that I've been noticing a lot lately is that I've seen a lot of women like doing startups, like they're leading and they're doing a lot of startups. So I guess my question is, would you prefer a woman leader in a startup as opposed to a man? I mean, and because the way I see it is there's a lot of transparency and a lot of I'm going to say a lot of honest things, when you see a woman in that role.
I think it depends on the person more than anything.
Okay.
So that's, and I've said I promise he's not like sitting in the background somewhere, but our CEO is actually probably one of the most transparent people that I've worked for. And that, I think it, I don't think it has to be gender specific or anything like that. I think it's really the person. And, one of the first things that we talked about when we started hiring was making sure that our job postings were using language that was welcoming to everyone. And so, that was awareness that, came from him. And, I think it's all about, making sure that you're self-aware of things, and that therefore your company is aware. But yeah, it's an interesting question though.
I think on that topic, it's a difficult conversation and a difficult topic, because when you're at a small startup, especially like hiring talent is so hard now, right? How do you avoid, I guess there's really no light way to put this, but like basically tokenization of women in these positions, right? Like if you're one of the few women, like how do you avoid being just like that diversity hire and being marketed as such? Because that's a huge issue, right? It's not just about having women in spaces, it's about listening to them, giving them the space and giving them the power in these seats to make decisions.
Yep. No, and I think that's something that for a lot of my career, so the first week I started at Blizzard, I was so excited. Going through the interview process was grueling. You get there, it's like, okay, I've made it to this place. It's my dream job. And that same week, an article got released about Blizzard actively hiring more women. I was like, amazing. Like completely invalidated on, everything that I thought I'd just accomplished. And I think that, I've definitely carried that with me. Like, I always want to make sure that I'm doing 130%, because, I don't want to be, just here because I'm a woman. So I think it's the only way to get away from that is, making sure that hiring practices are fair and we're not engaging in those types of activities. I I mean, in my specific position, and definitely feel it a lot. You know, I'll come into calls and I'll be the only woman on a call. You know, maybe we're on a client pitch, and it's like, okay, I still feel out of place. And you know, they introduce me as the director of engineering. I'm like, oh my gosh, all these people think that I'm just here because I'm female, and you know, they needed somebody, but you know, it's the guys in the background that are actually doing all the work. And it really it does mess with you, and so it's, you know, I don't really have an answer. It's more anecdotal, but yeah, it's a really tough thing.
Yeah, I have that similar experience. I think like also being a little bit younger, like looking younger, being a woman, you're kind of like, how do I have a place at the table to have these difficult conversations about very technical topics when I may or may not have the credentials, right? For example, my background is from like I went to UC Berkeley and I wrote papers on oyster farming, right? And now I'm selling technology. Like it's very difficult to be in that position. So I hear you. It's like oftentimes it feels like we're trying to overcompensate, right, to make sure that we're earning our spot at the table. But it's also difficult to see your peers, maybe male peers, like doing similar or maybe even less work than you, but still getting like the same amount of credit. It's like that's the I think when we talk about DEI, that's really the issue that we're trying to overcome, not necessarily like, hey, look at how many women we've hired. Like that's great, but
Yep.
yeah.
No, that's exactly, and you know, yeah, you know, later on, you know, you go in and you specifically at Blizzard, I've, you know, proven myself and everything, and you know, I definitely tried prying a couple times on, you know, were there other candidates? You know, was I actually the top? You know, I've come in and I've done this job, shown you that I can do it. Like, tell me the truth, and that's, you know, it does just stick with you for a while. So
Yeah.
If I can ask a question, because I live a different experience, obviously. If you do want to have a more diverse workplace, though, you do want people to be included, to have different opinions and different perspective than you have. How can you then, from a management perspective, make sure that the people you're bringing on are not the same as everyone else you have on the team, but you also don't want them to feel tokenized? You want them there because of the perspective they offer, because it's different than yours. But how can you make them not feel tokenized or feel like they're there specifically because they are representative of some other group? You want them to feel included. You don't want them to feel out group at all. How do you manage that?
I mean, I also would like to open this to everybody else too, but no, I think that's super tough. Like, especially like, I think for startups specifically, because you're in such small groups, and, you know, take, you know, my group specifically, we've spent a lot of time together. And it's difficult to not be cliquey in a way with, you know, bringing in new people and, you know, making sure that, like, you know, I think our founders, and you know, they all come from like Big Four consulting, accounting, finance throw types, and then I come in, and when they interviewed me, I dyed my purple hair brown the night before. John dyed my purple hair brown the night before, so I would like look normal in my interview, but you know, they hired me in and they were like, okay, we were expecting the purple hair. We figured that blended to your cred as a data engineer. And, you know, I talk about video games and all this nerdy stuff. And they were like, it's just, I don't think they knew what to do with me necessarily. And so I think it's, you know, bringing in people that are super different, and, you know, bringing in multiple. And so they aren't the out group anymore because they've created their own group. But having enough diversity, and it's not just DEI, but just different interests too, I think is so important.
Johanna, I see you have your hand raised, so I definitely want to give you a chance to speak. I did want to call attention to the time though. I was supposed to be moderating this piece, and the conversation was so good I wasn't paying attention to the clock. So just letting you know that we're gonna wrap it up here soon. But Johanna, please share.
I just wanted to share about building diverse teams where people feel respected for the diversity that they bring to the team. I think a lot of it starts with intention, and, you know, really having a game plan to build an equitable space where people's opinions are not only like supported, but also incorporated in changing the mission as they come on board. So especially in a startup environment, it's so important to be able to like allow the new employees to kind of help shape the culture, but also have a specific culture in mind from the get-go. Because I think when people can be different, but if they still have a primary place of where you're coming from and what you're trying to build, it's a lot easier to have people feel included and not just a part of the team because they're part of a minority group.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Well, that was, I think, a beautiful way to wrap up that discussion. Thank you. So Melissa, she has shared our LinkedIn links in the chat. Love to connect. I guess we'll wrap it up there. But thank you so much for hosting this conversation, Hallie. It was incredible content. I know I personally learned a lot, and I look forward to continuing some of this conversation in Slack.
No, thank you guys so much. I know we went over a ways, but I really appreciate it. Awesome conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.